Okay guys, about 3 days ago something happened to me after visiting a well-known abandoned psychiatric hospital that I felt I needed to share with you. Here's what I experienced at Gdokim Psychiatric Hospital. As I was saying, about 3 days ago, a couple of my friends from the States came to visit me in Korea. One of them, John, who is an urban explorer, he even has his own YouTube channel. He had heard about the Gdokim Psychiatric Hospital in Gongju, South Korea, from some urban exploration forums. He wanted to go there himself so he could film then upload the video onto his YouTube channel. Little is known about the Gdokim Psychiatric Hospital except that about 10 years ago, it was forced to close down due to some mysterious circumstances, causing the owner to flee the country. It's also said to be haunted by a doctor who performed lobotomies and other gruesome experiments on his patients. He was finally caught, but before he could stand trial for the murders, he was killed by one of his patients. Anyway, we decided to travel to Gongji, where we would stay for about 2 nights, one at the Gdokim hospital and the other at a nearby hotel. We arrived at Gongji around 6 p.m., and using the maps on our phones, we were able to locate Gdokim relatively quickly, where we entered the hospital around 7:30 p.m. Upon entering the hospital, I was hit by a foul smell like something crawled up and had died in there. But despite the smell, the hospital was still in fairly good condition. I started to take pictures of the interior and noticed somebody had written, "It's not so scary during the day, but at night," on the walls, causing me to panic for a second. After finishing up the last picture, I met up with my friends. Both Leah and I were each given a map of the hospital by John, and each assigned different floors we'd be exploring. I was assigned the first floor, Leah the second, and John the third, and since there was so much ground to cover, we all agreed to keep in touch through video chat. Within an hour of me exploring the first floor, I swear I could hear somebody whispering my name, but I chalked it up to my imagination and told myself that I'd never step foot in this place again. I was that freaked out. 30 minutes had passed since the whispering incident when I realized that it was way too quiet and that I hadn't heard from my friends for a while. I called out to them through my headset. John replied and asked me if I was alright. I answered yeah. I told him that I was checking up on them because they were way too quiet. He laughed at me and then told me that I was being paranoid. I resumed my exploration, and as I was rounding a corner, I thought I saw a woman walking ahead. Thinking it was Leah, I called out to her but got no reply. "Very funny, Leah," I said through the headsets. "What the hell are you talking about?" Leah asked. "Never mind," I said. I followed the woman and saw that she had entered the nurse's station. There I felt a draft of air coming from a hole in the wall, and I began to break away at the wall without much effort. Eventually, I found a door that wasn't on the map. I quickly notified my friends, but our conversation began to break up. I attempted to communicate with them again to let them know. I was going to explore what was behind that door. Standing in front of the door, I could feel a draft coming from under it. I nervously reached for the doorknob, and out to my surprise, it was unlocked. When I opened it, I spotted a set of stairs that seemed to lead down to what I assumed was the hospital basement. I noticed that it was pitch black as I descended down from the stairs, and it was hard to see anything in front of me. I switched on my headlamp and saw a huge room. I noticed that the room connected to a labyrinth of tunnel systems, and in the center of the room was a weird contraption. It reminded me of the contraption that was used on Alex in the movie A Clockwork Orange. Thinking I stumbled into something important, I shouted for my friends to look as I showed them my find through video chat. John told me to stay put as him and Leah were on their way to find me. While I waited for them, I started to take pictures of it when I felt something grab my ankle, causing me to trip and twist my ankle in the process. I started screaming for both of them to come and help me. I told them I fell and hurt my ankle. They were nearby and told me to stay put, so I waited for them. As I waited for them, I began to talk to them through video chat to help me stay calm. John apologized to me and told me that if we made it out of here, he would make it up to me and treat me to dinner, anything to keep me calm. As I continued chatting with John and Leah, I noticed that they had stopped talking. I asked them what the hell was going on, and then John asked who that person was standing behind me. Nervously, I turned my head and nobody was there. "Is this your meaning of a joke?" I asked, but he just nodded his head. I desperately scooted myself towards the nearest wall. I then used my phone to look up the area where I fell and started to scream because there stood a doctor staring at me with this grin on his face. His eyes seemed to glow, his skin had a deathly blue pallor to it, and his clothes looked disheveled. I continued to stare as the doctor slowly opened his mouth, revealing red teeth. Unable to move, I began to scream at the top of my lungs. It was at this point that John and Leia burst into the room, grabbed me from under my arms, and started dragging me out. Before we could exit the room, though, we heard a loud, ear-piercing scream coming from behind us. We turned to see what was making the noise, and that's when we saw the doctor standing near the entrance to the tunnels. His face seemed different now, and his mouth opened wider, revealing even more red teeth. He stood there staring at us for several seconds before he began to make chase, and caused the three of us to run like hell. We didn't look back once until we were safely out of the hospital. That was 3 days ago. I was released from the hospital today, and I'm at home now where I'm typing this out. I feel like I'm not alone though, because you see, I think something followed me home, and I swear I keep seeing the doctor everywhere in my apartment. Anyway, I'm thinking about calling somebody to come bless my apartment, but if anything else happens between that time, I'll keep you guys posted. I need to get some sleep because I haven't been sleeping since my terrifying experience at Gdokim Psychiatric Hospital. The story I'm about to tell you happened to me on Friday, and I'm still a bit shaken up by the whole incident. Remember the group of teachers that helped me move the chairs to the basement? Well, one night after school, one of them, I can't recall who, suggested we go to a karaoke bar, or noraebang, as it's called in Korea. This particular karaoke bar was located downtown and was very popular with the foreigners. After a hectic week at the school, we all agreed it was a good idea and decided that 7 p.m. would be a great time for all of us to meet up. When I arrived at 6:54, the other teachers were already there. We entered the karaoke bar and noticed that it was quite crowded, but it was a Friday night, so it wasn't unusual. Anyway, we were able to rent a room fairly easy, and we were given room 7. On the way to our room, the teachers who suggested this bar in the first place begins to tell us this creepy story. About 3 years ago, there was a middle-aged man who used to work here. He was a rather creepy old man that liked to spy on the women who patroned the karaoke bar. This went on for several years until one day he was caught by one of the managers. Afterward, the man was fired, but before he was kicked out for good, he swore revenge on the manager who fired him. A few days later, the man returned with a large knife and ended up stabbing 10 people, killing 5. Eventually, though, the police surrounded the place. With no place to go, the man took his own life in one of the karaoke rooms. Another twist of the story is in the room where he killed himself is also where he killed 5 people. They say now that him, along with the people that he killed on that fateful day, still haunt this place. As we ordered our drinks and picked out our songs, that same teacher told another story. This story she'd heard from a friend that used to work here part-time. There's one restroom in the bar that no matter how many times the staff replaces them, mirrors seem to fall and break when nobody else is around. The story behind this is about 6 years ago. A man found out that his wife was cheating on him, then confronted her and her lover at the karaoke bar. He chased her in the ladies' room, where he then killed her with a piece of broken mirror. It's this restroom with the falling mirrors. Some women reported seeing the reflection of a woman smiling in the mirror, yet there's nobody else in the restroom with them. The woman described feeling fear and dread after seeing the smiling woman. Anyway, to get back to what happened to me, 45 minutes had passed since we first entered the room, and of course, we were singing our hearts out, when all of a sudden the song began to change, almost like the sound of a tape recorder makes when the cassette tape is being eaten. Then, to make matters worse, the monitor with the song lyrics started to flicker, showing a man's face with several different expressions. As this was happening, we could also hear a man's voice coming through the headset, but we couldn't make out what he was saying. The whole thing lasted 5 minutes or so before the man's face finally vanished from the monitor, and the voice in the headset stopped. Now, if that wasn't scary enough, we stood there for several minutes trying to compose ourselves when I noticed one of the teachers was staring off at one of the corners of the room. Curious, I looked over at the same corner she was staring at, and I could see a figure of a young woman standing there. but none of the other teachers seemed to notice her. The young woman, who looked to be around 19, stood there staring back at us, and then she slowly began to move towards us. It was then I noticed that her clothes looked tattered, and I thought maybe she was homeless. She was wearing one of those jean jackets, a floral shirt, and a black shirt. She had black shoulder-length hair and was very pretty. She stood there staring at us, and I could see that her mouth was moving, yet no sound came out. As I continued to stare at her pale face, the power went out, and then we heard a woman's ear-piercing scream reverberate through the monitor, causing the other teachers to panic. It was at this point I feel somebody standing next to me, and their cold hands grab at my arm, gripping it tightly. At first, I thought it was one of the other teachers, but at that moment, the lights came back on and reality hit me. It wasn't one of the teachers. I then felt a burning pain on my arm, so I looked down and I noticed a bright red mark circling my arm. We immediately left the room and I notified the employee at the front at what just transpired. But he didn't seem surprised at all. He then apologized to us profusely and offered us a refund. When I got home that night, my arm was still sore, but the bright red mark was finally fading away. Unable to sleep, I went online so I could research the karaoke bar. I found everything the teacher told us was true. A former employee did stab 10 people, killing 5, and there was a woman who was murdered in the ladies' restroom by her jealous husband. What she didn't tell us, though, was that last year, on the first anniversary of the stabbings, they found the body of a young woman in the karaoke bar. She was discovered in room 7 and was later identified as the daughter of the manager who fired the employee. After the creepy encounter at that place, I will never set foot in that karaoke bar again. Anyway, I'm feeling tired, so for now, I'm heading to bed. But I promise to keep you guys updated. About 3 Halloweens ago, a bunch of us were hanging out in this really popular bar that catered to foreigners. One person we were hanging out with was an army friend of ours who, at the time, was stationed at an army base right outside of the city called Gdokim. In order to protect my friend's identity, I will not reveal the name of the city base he was stationed at. Although my friend Steve was normally a very social person, on this night in question, he seemed distant. As the night wore on, he started to get agitated at everyone and everything. I had enough of his attitude and finally broke down and asked him what the hell his problem was, but he ignored me. At this point, he began to shake violently, and it took us a few minutes or so to finally get him to calm down. Afterwards, he was able to tell us about something that had happened to him a few days ago. As you guys know, I'm an MP in the Army. Well, about 3 days ago, I was assigned guard duty at the main munitions building that was located in the secluded area of the base. Recently, there had been a string of break-ins, and the higher-ups wanted to tighten up security to ensure no weapons were being stolen, and of course, to catch the culprit red-handed. On this particular night, though, there was 4 of us assigned to guard duty. I remember it vividly, as the nights were breezy and the skies were clear. Me and one other MP, Chris, were placed near the front of the gates, while the other 2 MPs patrolled the surrounding area. As Chris and I chatted about football, we got a call from one of the MPs patrolling the building. He seemed scared shitless as he yelled at us to hurry up to the munitions building, that somebody was trying to break in again. We quickly notified our sergeant about the possible break-in and ran over to where the other MPs were. When we found the other guys, they were both standing there frozen in place and staring at the munitions building like they had both just seen ghosts. As if on cue, I heard some noises coming from the building and asked them why they were just standing there, but of course, I got no reply. Steve and I, being the brave ones, decided to go investigate to find out what the hell was making all that racket and scaring the other MPs. As we cautiously approached the building, we could hear that someone or something was definitely inside of it. Drawing our weapons, we both shouted for whoever it was to show themselves, and of course, nobody came out. Entering the building, we used our flashlights to see inside the room. At first, we didn't see anything, but then we heard it. The same noise from before, and that's when we saw her. She was standing there with her back turned towards us, and I could see that she had black hair which seemed to be tied up in a bun. She wore one of those traditional Korean dresses which appeared to be dirty and a bit tattered. I yelled out to her, "Ma'am, You're not supposed to be here. This is government property. I'm gonna have to ask you to leave, and if you don't comply, I'll have to arrest you for trespassing." I added the last part, hoping that she understood what I was saying, and leave. But that wasn't the case. She stood there silently as she began to slowly turn around until she was facing me, and when I saw her face, I froze. Instead of a face, there was nothing but skin. No nose, no mouth, just skin. I stood there unable to move as I felt the surge of electricity course through my body. Finally, we were able to break our trance as we slowly backed out of the munitions building, never once taking our eyes off that woman. Then, she let out a wail as she began to move towards us. No, more like glide towards us, because I noticed that her feet weren't touching the ground. Running out of the building, we nearly collided with our sergeant, but as we glanced behind us, we noticed that the woman was gone. We, along with our sergeant, went back inside the building to see if she was inside, and of course, it was empty. He then asked the MP who witnessed the whole thing what happened, and he told us his version. As he was patrolling the area, he noticed that the motion sensor lights were going crazy. When he was scanning the area for the culprit, he noticed a woman walking towards the munitions building. Before he could stop her, she turned around, and that's when he got a good look at her face, or lack thereof, and nearly shit himself. This was when he radioed in for us. The sergeant wrote up a report and told us off the record that the higher-ups were thinking about closing this building up. Apparently, there's been a lot of weird stuff happening here, and we weren't the first people to see this woman, and that there's been sightings of her since the start of the Korean War. Rumor has it that the woman was once in love with an American soldier, and they would have their nightly rendezvous, where the munitions building is now. One day, after discovering she was pregnant, she told him the news, but he wasn't having any of it and he broke it off with her. Distraught over the breakup, she jumped into a nearby river and drowned herself. Ever since then, she's been haunting this place. After sharing his story with us, his face seemed to soften up, but after a few minutes became worrisome. He added that although it had been a week or so since the encounter, he's been seeing her everywhere. That was 3 years ago, and I heard Steve move back to the States. I also heard after his ghostly encounter, he was never the same again. Anyway, that's my story for you. I'll keep you guys updated with the strange stuff I've encountered.
Chronicler here. I would like to thank Gdokim for allowing us to tell their story. If you want to hear more of their story, make sure to subscribe to stay updated on our videos. If you want to read more stories like this one, be sure to check out the author's link in the description and show them some love. If you're interested in having your story narrated, be sure to reach out to our humble overseer as he continues his journey to pull the darkest stories from the infinite depths of the internet. Until next time, fiends, and remember, we are darkness.